So you might have heard tell we got trouble on the border, so we're going to do something most people aren't doing. We're actually going to have an American and a Canadian talk to each other, which we do all the time because we're buddies. That's David Clement, Consumer Choice Center, a lot of other stuff. And last I checked, buddy, you are a certified Canadian. Is that still going with everything going on in the news, or?
I am a certified Canadian. That is true. Yes.
You're one of them.
I am one of them.
This thing is spiraling out of control. Even I did TV on this last night. I know you did a video yesterday on this, and even right as we went to record this, noonish on Tuesday, this is already spiraling worse. I think what needs to happen here, though, is let's start back at the beginning of how we got here, because I think that's the piece that's missing, because now it's just everybody's grabbing their one piece of the story. Donald Trump in his first term made a big deal out of the UCMJA, I always say it wrong, the USMCA trade agreement that was supposed to replace or supersede NAFTA, however you want to frame that.
Yep.
That's where we got to start, because they did that agreement, and that was in the first term, and it was a big deal, and everybody shook hands, and President Trump thought this is the greatest deal of all deals. We can debate the finer points on it, but, you know, it wasn't my theory on it wasn't the best, wasn't the worst, probably what needed to be happen, probably as good as you're going to do in the moment. I was okay with it.
Yep.
Fast forward to the second term, and we have the Canadian election. We have the Carney 19-point swing overnight when the 51st state stuff happens.
Yep.
And now here we are a year and a half later. It's all come to a head. Is that a good summation of it? Because we're not going back and understanding this was a sequence of events, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the other sequence of events would be, so from Carney winning, well, actually from the end of the Trudeau era to Carney winning. So you have talk about tariffs from Trump, 51st state stuff, obviously not appreciated. Then you had a Canadian counter response, which I long argued against from the beginning. One, because there are asymmetries that we have to acknowledge, despite the fact that counter tariffs might make us feel good, like we're standing up to a bully. Our politicians have a bit of cognitive dissonance on whether tariffs are in fact good or bad. And this includes the Trump administration, right? It's turned everybody into a hypocrite. So you have Doug Ford or federal ministers or Carney talking about how U.S. tariffs are taxes for American consumers to pay, which is, of course, true. But then we had retaliatory tariffs. Most of them were actually relaxed after Carney had been prime minister. Some of them lingered on, mostly at the provincial level. Some of the more serious ones were the alcohol ban, which was very much not appreciated by the Americans. Those continued on, and Trump's move from there was to then further escalate with this 50% threat on 5% or $20 billion worth of Canadian trade. Potentially a deal falls through in the middle of the night, and here we are. And what a mess. What a mess. I mean, just moments ago, Canada announced its own retaliatory tariffs in response to the 50% tariffs. And so it just appears like we're going tit for tat, taxing ourselves.
Yeah, and I said this on Canadian TV last night, and I got a lot of pushback on it, but I think this is, if you're going to look for a glimmer of hope here, and I think this aluminum thing might play into it a little bit, there's always this brinksmanship phase to a Donald Trump negotiation that he's really invested in. I'm not talking about something that they did a deal and then he comes in and takes credit for. I'm talking about something he's invested in, which this Canadian thing he's paying a lot of attention to. There's always this brinksmanship period where he just says something so utterly outrageous and pushes it. And I think that's what some of this is. I think when you saw the automotive stuff that came out, note the date on that. That was for the first of the year. That's after the midterm elections. That's way down the road. Prime Minister Carney is talking about this September 8th date, which is 2 weeks and an odd from now. They're working on different timelines. I think there is some brinksmanship here. I think the Carney calculation is that he can maybe scare Trump or worry Trump with the economic impact enough, because Trump's got an election in 80 some days and he doesn't, I think that's a huge risk. I understand the thought process. I think that's where they're coming from it. And I think Carney and the government just think their backs to the walls, like, okay, we're into sovereignty territory here, not economic. I can't back up off this. I think everybody's walked themselves into the corners here. I know Trump started it. I think Canada has painted themselves into a little bit of a corner in response to it. But I do understand their response. Like, look, you got to have, especially if some of the reporting that we're sourcing on what
the demands were.
Look, I won't put the name on it, but the particular end, if it really was Lutnick showing up at the last minute and blowing it up, which is the reporting we're getting, with some of the specific demands that it is being reported on both sides now that he said, yeah, obviously Canada couldn't agree to any of that. Like, and as an America, yeah, of course they did. So then is that on purpose or not? I think everybody's just painted into a corner now where it's somebody's going to have to blink, because what we're talking about here is a lot of economic pain for both countries.
Yeah, and I mean, on the Lutnick kind of last minute changes, there are differing versions of this story.
Yes, there are.
So Mark Carney has framed it, and it's kind of been punted around the media circles in Canada as an attack on the French language, specifically or hypothetically going after language laws. The administration, including the president himself, has said, no, it's not about that. It was about Canadian content rules within streaming platforms. Two drastically different things. One is, so if it is true that Lutnick came in with a potential attack on language laws, official bilingualism, the American equivalent to that would be like going after the Second Amendment. It's just not going to happen. Whether or not there are merits to it, right? And there are plenty of people in English Canada who, if you're in rural Alberta, you probably wonder why everything has French on it, because you don't speak French. Nobody speaks French. You're in Alberta, you're in an English-speaking province, etc. Regardless of the merits, it is an untouchable part of Canadian Confederation. And so if that's true, if that version of events is true, then my impression would be there was never really going to be a deal to begin with, because that's a bridge too far, and the Americans would have known that. And it was like the Hail Mary to blow it up at the end. Now, the flip side of that is, if it was really just CanCom regulations for Netflix, then there's maybe some domestic political gamesmanship from Carney here, where he gets to play that card to his advantage. We have 3 by-elections coming up at the end of the month, one of them which is in Quebec, one of which could be a massive swing riding for the Liberals. It was held by a conservative, a very popular one, whom he appointed to the Senate, which removed him from Parliament to move him to the Senate. They could very well take that seat. Framing this in the context of language and culture and French is very advantageous, because you get to beat the same drum that was largely beat during the general election, where the Liberals came from 20 points back to pull it off. Which version is true, we don't know, because we're not going to see the actual text. We just kind of get anonymous sources here talking to the New York Times or the Globe and Mail. But it's a mess. And as you alluded to, all we're getting out of this is just mutual economic pain.
Yeah, and I've been trying to run this down as best I can. I'm not a reporter, but I do have people I talk to. And the version I got was the French language stuff and the digital platforming stuff was kind of the, I hate to say culture war, because there's real firm things under there, but you understand what I'm saying. That's the stuff that's going to make headlines, right? It's kind of the culture warring, plays into the bases on both sides of the border kind of stuff. That was in there. But the version I got from the DC folks was the Trump administration, and this came out in some of the Canadian reporting now too, so I'm starting to think there's something to it. Again, sourced and reported, not definitive. That the thing that broke it for the Trump folks was they wanted Canada to impose the American level of tariffs, which means whatever Trump wants it to be at the moment, on all their trade deals. That's the version I got told. That was the deal breaker, where then the Trump team basically went in and blew the thing up because they weren't going to get the one thing they wanted. Again, and
rightfully so.
Rightfully so,
Rightfully
because
so. I'm a rabid free trader. I
yeah,
would walk away from the prospect of that deal. We're going to get a little nerdy here.
very
It's the distinction between market economies and non-market economies.
correct.
So
Correct.
in the USMCA, it does say that you have to notify one of the three partner or both other partners in the deal. If you're going to sign a free trade deal with a non-market economy, they get to see the language of it first. If you sign it anyway, that gives them grounds to leave the USMCA. And that would go both ways, right? Obviously non-market economy, we're talking about China, but
Yeah,
it's
it's the China clause. Let's
yeah,
be
but
adults here. That's what it is.
hypothetically, Trump signs a trade deal with North Korea. Canada could exit the USMCA and say, yeah, we don't want any part of that.
Well, these days, I don't know if we could
Well,
hypothetical that too
yeah.
much the way he's been acting, but no,
So I mean,
I agree with you.
that's a non-starter. You can't do that because then you are giving up your ability to actually diversify your trade. And if we've learned anything, the kind of issue with our approach. Um, NAFTA has its merits, the USMCA has its merits, but it very much put a lot of our eggs in one basket, and all it took was one president to tear or to potentially tear it all apart. So some diversification and freer trade with other markets around the world would certainly help as a hedge. It would eliminate that option. And the other reporting, which you were probably going to allude to, was the ability to potentially change or renege on any of this at any point, which really
Right.
just defeats
The
the purpose.
pencil signature comment, that's exactly what that was
Yeah.
aimed at.
And so you can't agree to it. You can't agree to it. I mean, you could agree to suboptimal terms if this was the end, right? And it was in writing that there were going to be no more emergency declarations, no more dusting off legislation from the 30s or 40s that hadn't been used in 90 years, no more of that. You could take a suboptimal deal and leave some of the sectoral tariffs lessened but still on the board. But you can't take it if it can all change based on how the president is feeling one afternoon. And so the thing for Canadians, which I'm having to remind people, is there is a difference between saying no thank you to that deal and saying no thank you and then enacting counter tariffs which Canadians are going to pay. I think most people can recognize that under what we think the terms were, totally reasonable to step aside and say no, sorry, that one's not for us. But then to turn around and tariff, I'll use aluminum as an example. Most of it comes from Quebec. The United States gets most of its aluminum from Quebec, from Canada, but primarily from Quebec. So if we take an example of beer cans, aluminum coming from Quebec, we don't have a single rolling mill for beer cans in this country, in Canada. So it goes to the US where it's turned into sheets. As it crosses the border, before it's turned into sheets, you have Trump's tariffs. It's turned into sheets or cans, and it goes back across the border. And now we're going to have a retaliatory tariff against our own aluminum. It's just in a different form. And this is the insanity of this type of trade war because, I mean, that's beer cans, but apply that to an auto parts manufacturer in Windsor who uses Michigan steel. And now Trump will be tariffing the auto part from Canada, which was actually from used Michigan steel and then assembled by workers at Ford. And it's like, why gum up the entirety of the integrated supply chain? I mean, and even U.S. manufacturers, the 50% tariff on auto parts is so high, so potentially high, that they're saying this can't be real. Like he can't actually do this because it would be crippling to American jobs and American manufacturing jobs in the automotive sector. So, yeah, I mean, just insanity all the way around.
Yeah, and let's talk about the elephant in the room. I got into this on TV last night a little bit, and again, people push back on it, but you did a whole video on there's no such thing as an American or Canadian car anymore. It's just,
Yep.
it's all integrated with the parts. The one piece of this that nobody's talking to, although Carney kind of halfway threw a little shade at it because he knows better than to say this out loud. Everything from Idaho east in the northern United States has an integrated grid with Canada electric wise.
Yep.
Everything. 60%
Mm-hmm.
of crude oil imports come in from Canada. And the difference in that is because what we make in the Permian Basin, for example, in Texas, that's light sweet crude. We bring in the Canadian heavy crude and we refine it through special refineries for a lot of special purposes. I won't bore everybody with that, but it's a big deal. We got to have
Discount.
that at a
discount.
huge discount, by the
Yep.
way. And we import 100% of our natural gas into the northern region, especially the northeast United States and places like Michigan, from Canada. If Canada actually wanted to pull the energy lever, that's where this thing gets ugly and adversarial in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
Carney's only kind of halfway hinted at it in that speech he gave. I guess it was the day before yesterday now. That's the only other escalatory step they've got. I understand what he's trying. Again, I think they're working on separate timelines. I think Trump just wants to deal. He doesn't care when. I think Carney knows he's got 2 weeks to button this up or it gets really, really ugly and it's probably going to destroy him and everybody with it. So I think the pressure is going to be on for them to try to get this done and try to get Trump to back off. And Trump's either got to back off or make a deal here, because if Canada is the one country on earth, and we'll lump the Gulf states together as one big thing, outside of the Middle East, Canada is the one nation on earth that can change gas prices in America tomorrow, right now.
Yeah.
And I'm worried that if they don't stop this escalation, I mean, Trump and Carney both, if they keep this tit for tat, that's the only lever Carney's going to really have that he can actually do some damage. That's going to hurt his own country long term a whole lot worse.
And some of that is out of his control.
And it's out of his control
technically, because out of his control jurisdictionally.
Yeah.
And so, yes, the prime minister does have some leverage on the premiers. But when Doug Ford says, "Oh, I'll just turn the lights off," Carney would have to then threaten the province of Ontario.
Actually walk through that, especially for the American audience that doesn't like who's Doug Ford, because they don't realize he's the Canadian Ontarian Trump. And so like there was going to be a meeting of them two guys as supervillains. It was bound to happen, and this is going to be it. Just talk through that system real quick for an American or an international audience that doesn't understand. The Providence system is very different than the state system. It's very different than the parliamentary system in the UK, for example. Just walk people through that real quick. You know, I don't want to go down the Alberta road, but you kind of got to here. Explain this just real quick for folks.
Long story short, it is more of the the premier, which is the governor in American terms, of Ontario, more in his jurisdiction in terms of various energy policies and the cost or price of energy going south of the border. And so, I mean, he suggested that he could turn the lights off. He suggested that they could just increase the price by 50%, which would put tens of thousands of Americans into energy poverty overnight. It's not fully at the discretion of the prime minister, given where the decision-making authority lands. Now, I don't think Carney would let Doug Ford do that without serious repercussions and say the federal government's going to start withholding money from Ontario until they figure it out, and then you'd have a jurisdictional battle. But there is it's the same thing with alcohol. So like technically the prime minister cannot order the provinces to put out U.S. alcohol back on the shelves, because the province is the only buyer of alcohol at the wholesale level. And so it's entirely at the discretion of the provincial government whether or not they want to do that. And that is partially why you have this, let's say, rewind before the 50% threat. You had this weird dichotomy of Carney potentially being somewhat buddy-buddy with Trump and the premiers being barking dogs, talking about, Wab Canoe in Manitoba, talking about the Epstein files and all sorts of things. It's just not helpful. But when it comes to U.S. alcohol, it's their discretion. Other than trying to use a federal lever to force or to coerce the provinces to put U.S. alcohol back on the shelf, there's actually not much the federal government can do because it is the province who buys the alcohol.
How much of this is a structural problem? Because the structural problem on the American side is all of this tariff stuff is actually not the purview of the president. He's really stretching all. He's already had the Supreme Court knock down a couple of tariffs. He's calling all these national emergencies and national defense. None of it is. This is all just whims of the president. But Congress is the mechanism to reel that in. And of course, the Congress is all about giving President Trump what he wants, the GOP majority, and that'll be on the ballot in 80 some days, and they're probably going to lose Congress over it. So that's a structural problem underneath what President Trump's doing. How much unity does Canada actually have? Now, I know Carney's saying they have unity. I know Poilievre came out and said, I support the prime minister for the moment on one. They finally got them two to agree on something, so minor miracles. But then you got the Doug Ford stuff. But the individuality of the provinces is always going to be a structural issue in Canadian politics. How unified are they going to be if this doesn't have a swift resolution and this really does start getting painful? Because we have that structural problem on the U.S. side that's causing the problem. There's a structural problem on the Canadian side that might make this worse trying to get a solution, doesn't it?
Yeah. So there's multiple layers of what may be good domestically for political purposes, may be bad for the country at a national or economic level. So it is politically advantageous for Doug Ford to tell the president to kiss his ass, which he did yesterday. It is politically advantageous for Wab Kinew to talk about the Epstein files and yada, 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 because their polling numbers go up provincially. Does it help in terms of a unified Team Canada approach to trade negotiations? No, probably not. I mean, you have the president talking about renaming Lake Ontario today. Yeah. So it kind of feels a little bit like grade 9, where it's like, oh yeah, look, you're not coming to my birthday. And it's advantageous for the premiers to behave this way, regardless of what is in the best interest of the country. Unity wise, I would say everybody would be in the Doug Ford camp, with the exception of Danielle Smith in Alberta, because that's where the oil comes from. So she was obviously upset that it wasn't a deal, but then pushed back at the idea of retaliating, which I think was the right course of action. But outside of that, the rest of the premiers, minus Danielle Smith, would be entirely on board for whatever it is the counter response is, dollar for dollar, potentially export tariffs, yada, yada, yada. With the exception of Danielle Smith, is because Alberta has largely dodged the more serious attacks on Canadian industry. Mostly, I think, out of necessity, as you alluded to, the just sheer volume of crude that's going from Canada to the U.S. It would be even more of an economic nightmare for Americans. So she doesn't want to get bogged down in that. But outside of that, the unity across the premiers is pretty solid. And that includes lefty NDP Wab Kinew and conservatives in under Doug Ford or out on the East Coast. And so, yeah, it's just very complicated in terms of managing, because every time the premiers get to talk about Donald Trump, they get to put the Captain Canada cape on, and that plays well.
It plays well. How exposed is Carney here? Because again, I think he knows his man. I think he's like, I can get a deal where Donald Trump will go on TV and say he won, but on paper, Canada got what they needed, or at least most of what they needed. I think that's what he's shooting for, and he's trying to force, and he's just hoping there's enough pressure to bear. I think there's a bit of a miscalculation understanding the election, because even if the Democrats take Congress, they're not going to have a veto-proof majority to really reel Trump in on tariffs, which is Congress has the power, but they have to pass legislation or they have to repeal the certain sections of regulatory code, and both of those are subject to vetoes, so they're not going to get a veto-proof majority. So I think that's a mistake if they're thinking that's going to help. How exposed is Carney here? I know politically you can put the cape on, and Trump is very unpopular, and that helps him. There's no version of this where both the Canadian side and the American side are going to suffer economically if we don't fix this quickly. And the economy, look, it's big truck versus little truck. The bigger truck's going to be able to take more damage. So how exposed is he?
So yes, the big truck can take more damage but the passengers in the big truck are maybe less united on dealing with the bumps um, in terms of taking that damage. That would probably be my assessment. The general sentiment in Canada, I think, and I may be one of the few outliers, is whatever it takes. Um, and so the general assessment here is like, yes, there's an asymmetry, but I don't think. Um, I mean, what would happen if what's a gallon of gas right now where you are?
Sub 340 to 360, most places somewhere in that, and then more expensive
What?
places like California.
Yeah. So
So
what would happen if it went to
four,
425
four
or
is the
four?
magic number. When it gets over four, everybody starts talking about it.
Yeah.
And
So
it would not take a lot, as we've seen. It doesn't take a lot to get. Now, will it stay there because it
yeah.
spikes and that sort of thing? If you get into a sustained thing, but then the other thing, and I'll go ahead and bring this up. The problem, I understand the electoral stuff on the American side. You've got a contentious Senate race in Maine, highly tied into Canada.
Yep.
Michigan, we've already had the Gordie Howe mess and a whole bunch of other stuff going on. Michigan is now tied in.
It doesn't help that the Dems fumbled the ball in Michigan because it should have been a layup. And
Well,
now, yeah,
but still, it's Michigan, Minnesota to a lesser extent, but
yeah,
still, and there's that energy bugaboo hanging out there, the specter of that. I want to address it this way. And we just fell prey to it. We're talking about this as an economic exercise. I don't think it's an economic exercise. I think it's an ego exercise with economic nomenclature on it. I think that's where we're at now. So that's where I'm like, everybody's in a corner, and I don't see how they're going to get out of it immediately because somebody's got to take an L here, or they've got to take a well manicured L that they can claim as a win on TV, which is what Carney's trying to pull off. And that's a narrow path to get done without somebody getting hurt. And by somebody, I mean you and me, the normal people.
yeah. I mean, if it was me and I was the prime minister, I'd probably tell the premiers to stop because they're not helping.
Well, that
Um,
always works.
yeah, I would tell them to stop, and I would go back to the to Jameson Greer specifically and say, okay, here's what we want. Get rid of the whatever this potential veto clause if it exists, um, or revert the language to similar terms as the USMCA, and from there we can hash out the other dairy access and auto tariffs and whatnot. Again, and get rid of the language that says you can go back on this. That would be, I think, the only path out for Carney that doesn't involve a world of pain economically, both today and 10 years from now, because the economic pain from whatever the bailout packages are going to have to do for impacted industries is just going to be adding to what has already been record deficits. And we don't have the luxury of being the world's reserve currency and getting away with this in the same way that I mean the Trump or previous administrations have. And so it's a combination of our counter response or counter tariffs of inflating the cost of goods, plus the deficit burden of whatever the bailout packages are. It's not going to be pretty, and there's going to be both short-term and long-term ramifications. So if it was me, I would just try and get back to the table, get those two sticking points out of the way, clarify what was actually on the table in regards to French, and then deal with the actual economics of what the grievances are both ways: lumber moving south, steel and aluminum, etc., dairy access moving north, and go from there. But outside of that, if those were real red lines for the Americans, well, then there is no path forward, because it's just not going to happen.
I keep coming back to it, but for the American audience, because we've kind of become numb to Trump saying really dumb, embarrassing stuff, we just have. The 51st state stuff is just like explained for the Canadian from the Canadian viewpoint, because I do Canadian media and I have the meetings with people, so like I know, but I don't think people really understand what a GSW to the foot the 51st state and he did it again today. He said they think they're a state. It's just such an idle, childish. It's bad enough he has this zero-sum economic understanding, which is wrong to start with, but we'll deal with that some other day. The 51st state stuff is just such an unnecessarily stupid adversary. You're making an enemy out of a neighbor with a 2,000-mile border and the most integrated economies of major top 30 countries in the world.
Yeah.
It's the dumbest, most idiotic, petty, childish thing ever. And he just won't stop doing it. How is the Canadians ever going to do a deal when I know it's one thing for him to say it, but apparently he's basing his economic theory of Canada based off them being the 51st state, which is just nonsense. But you're the Canadian. Explain, because Americans, this stuff just goes over our head, him name calling people. No, that's the genesis point of all this mess, really.
Yeah, and it really taps into what already exists generally in the political culture of Canada, left, right, center, which is I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but a soft anti-Americanism. And I've never, so during the first run up with this stuff, I kind of equated it to like the peak of Iraq war outrage. And I was like, this is maybe the closest I've seen it. This is a new level that we have never seen before. And so whenever the president talks about 51st state, I don't think there could be a more uniting insult where uniformly across the board, Canadians are repulsed by it. Even so much so that like the separatists in Quebec are dealing with the fact that there is a rise of Canadian nationalism in Quebec. And the leader of the Separatist Party, who may very well win the next provincial election, has said, yeah, but we're not going to do a referendum on separating from Canada until after Donald Trump's in office. Which is, of course, because he knows that as long as Donald Trump's in office, it would be nearly impossible for them to have any shot at even getting close to 50%. So it's entirely unifying, and it's probably counterproductive from whatever the president's views are on what he wants to accomplish, because one, it makes, not that there was ever a shot at Canada becoming a 51st state, but it makes it impossible. And two, it makes the Canadian population more willing to endure pain for the sake of pushing back and standing up against Donald Trump than they otherwise would be.
Yeah, I remember when I first started covering Canadian stuff, I was talking to you about it, and you said, remember, the key to Canadian politics is just don't be American, which was kind of tongue-in-cheek. And I'll tell you, I will say this, if he can get the Quebecois friends of ours to behave themselves, he really should get probably a Nobel Peace Prize, but that's a joke. Everybody, calm down, Montreal. I'm kidding. Let's end it with this, though, and talk about it, because I keep getting asked the same question, whether it's Canadian TV, American radio, TV. I'm doing one at 2:00. They're going to ask me again. This will be the question, like, is this going to be fixable after Donald Trump? I think some of it, I know our European friends, a lot of them, they're just like, it's Trump. When Trump's done, we'll readjust. The Canadian one, though, feels different. And I really am worried. Look, my suite mate in college was Canadian from Hamilton, close to your area you're familiar with. Yep. And I remember him and me talking about, like, because, industrial area, he was coming to college in West Virginia. We've been friends and neighbors for so long. This does feel a little bit different. This feels like it's more than just Donald Trump. I don't think Trump going off the scene alone is going to fix this. I know economically Canada is always going to be more EU than America in a lot of ways, and they're going to push those things. I know the China piece, which we'll debate some other time, because I think it's actually obfuscating a lot of this mess, because there's legitimate concerns there, but we can't get to it because we're name calling everybody. How do we fix this going forward? So number one, how does Canada and America repair this actual negotiation? And then number two, long term, how does Canada and America repair that soft, let's not anti-Americanism is too strong, but that we don't want to be America, we want to be Canada, which kind of reflexively becomes we're not going to be like what you are. That's already there. This is playing into it. How do we fix this relationship? So how do we fix this negotiation? And how do we fix the relationship among the people afterwards? Because it does feel to me like I think this is beyond just Trump now. I think this is Trump reveals stuff. I think this has brought some stuff up that's going to have to be dealt with. It's not just Trump leaves and it's all hunky dory. I don't think that's going to be the case here.
I'm still optimistic that Democrats can not be such a gong show, and not be overtaken by the progressive squad side of things, who on paper agree with all of this trade shenanigans. It's the same. They have the same economic worldview. It's under a different color, but it's the same. If somebody reasonable for the Dems wins the primary and becomes president, that probably helps quite a bit. If Marco Rubio hypothetically becomes president and goes back to old Marco Rubio, that probably could help quite a bit. If JD Vance wins and keeps this dog and pony show going, then it probably never returns. I just don't think there would be enough patience on the Canadian side to deal with the shenanigans for a Vance presidency, even of one term. But it really depends on whether or not on the Democratic side, whomever is, let's say, the candidate at the top of the ticket, has probably spent a lot of time tweeting about why are we going after our greatest ally? Are they going to have it in them to repeal the tariffs and the damage done? I'm not certain. I don't know. That would be a big step required to try and kind of repair things. So I am still optimistic. We are two peoples who are more alike than we are not alike, which right now might light some heads on fire in Canada. How dare you?
Yeah.
But that is, of course, true. Culture in North America runs north-south more so than it does east-west. People from Maine are far more similar to people from New Brunswick or Nova Scotia than they are like me, or Alberta and Montana, or the West Coast and Vancouver, and Seattle and California.
True.
That's maybe not the most politically savvy thing to say right now, but I'm not running for anything. So I think the foundation could still be there, but it's going to take a lot of work. Probably an apology at some point. Would Canada ever get that? I don't think so. But we're very close to, despite me being optimistic, we're very close to things never being the same again. And that would be a real shame.
Yeah.
That would be a real shame.
We have a lot of similarities, but have you ever seen Big Brother and Little Brother fight? There ain't nothing more vicious.
Yeah, well, this is.
I think there's a lot of that to it too. Yeah.
All the time is we're the little brother. You moved out of the house a little earlier. We stayed at home with mom and dad a little longer, and you maybe didn't leave on the best terms originally, but you seem to have mended fences with home, and we're still kind of loosely tied to home. But there is a familial nature there in terms of Canada-U.S. relations. It's the JFK quote, which I don't need to rehash, but in terms of geography making us neighbors and values making us friends, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to see it go away. I don't want to see the relationship between Canada and the U.S., tourism, trade, et cetera, sports, you name it, go away, because it has been so beneficial for both countries. But my optimism is waning.
If we let you win the Stanley Cup, everything's forgiven, right?
Well, I always find it hilarious when Ron DeSantis tweets about Florida teams that are 60% Canadian-born players, tweeting about how Canada hasn't won a Stanley Cup, and it's like, oh, come on, Ron, you know better.
Yeah, but the jersey was a what there, Toronto Leaf fan?
Yeah, well, We don't talk about that.
Oh, see, there you go. Okay. All right. A little bit of a light note. I hope
Yeah.
we get out of this. I hate this. I said in the production meeting yesterday we were having before we did it, because we were being real careful how we phrased a lot of that yesterday. And I was like, in 10 years of doing media, this is the story I think I hate the most. That's not just like a crime or somebody died or something. Like, this is so freaking unnecessary.
Oh,
Like, this whole thing is just unnecessary and it's
it's a
dumb.
complete unforced error.
And I think Carney's making some mistakes. I understand why he's making them, but I think he's forced himself into some problems. I think Trump's been absolutely boorishly
Flagrant.
awful on this.
Yeah.
He's pig ignorant on how this stuff works.
Yep.
And making it work. This was so unnecessary, man. We should
Yep.
all be friends. This is dumb.
Yes.
That's my high dollar political analysis. This is stupid, and I hate it, and I hope it ends soon. David Clement, Consumer Choice Center, Canadian of note, long-suffering Toronto Maple Leafs fan.
Yes.
Good luck next year. We'll see how that goes. Let people know how they can keep up with you, because you're going to be all over media the next couple of days, because you already got your tie on and everything.
Yeah, at David Clement on Twitter, consumerchoicecenter.org for the organization.
Yeah, and you guys are doing really good work. I saw Steven was on BBC the other day, did a really great job, our buddy Steven. So you do good work, buddy. I appreciate a few minutes, and hopefully we'll get this stuff squared away and quit fighting. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Oh.